He walked into court wearing a hoodie and sneakers. The judge smirked as he entered. Lawyers rolled their eyes. The gallery laughed quietly under their breath. To them, he was just another street kid wasting the court's time. But by the end of that hearing, no one was laughing. Not the judge, not the lawyers, not even the woman trying to take his cousins home. Because this 17-year-old had come prepared. And when he spoke, he didn't just win an argument. He shattered every assumption about who deserves to be heard in a courtroom. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the door swung open. In walked a thin black teenager wearing a dark gray hoodie, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers. His hair was natural, slightly messy, and his eyes held a calm that seemed out of place for someone his age facing the cold machinery of the legal system. As he stepped forward to the defense table, the judge raised an eyebrow and scoffed softly. "Who are you supposed to be?" he asked with a tinge of sarcasm, glancing at his clerk as if expecting a chuckle. "I'm here for my cousin, sir," the teenager said, his voice steady but soft. The judge leaned back in his massive leather chair, towering in his black robe. "Do you have counsel representing you, or are you wasting my court's time this morning?" A woman in a navy blue suit, the plaintiff's attorney, chuckled lightly. "Your Honor, he's just a minor. This should be quick." People in the gallery exchanged amused looks. Some shook their heads. Others sighed with pity. One older man whispered to his wife, another kid thinking he can beat the system, but the teenager didn't flinch. He opened the worn canvas backpack slung over his shoulder, pulled out a thick stack of organized papers, and placed them gently on the table. "I filed my notice to appear last week," he said calmly, sliding a copy to the clerk. "And here's the affidavit of support from my cousin. She's working 2 jobs and couldn't be here today. I've also included the record of rental payments, screenshots of bank transfers, and a notarized statement from the building maintenance supervisor confirming the repairs she completed herself after the landlord refused." The room fell silent. The plaintiff's lawyer blinked in confusion. She reached for the documents, scanning them rapidly, her brow furrowing deeper with every page. The judge leaned forward, his smirk fading. "Where did you get all this?" he asked, his voice quieter. Now the teenager lifted his chin. "At the legal aid clinic. I've been going after school every day to prepare. My cousin was too scared to speak up. She raised me when my parents were gone. I'm here to speak for her." He turned toward the plaintiff's table. "Your eviction." Notice was served with a falsified repair order. You can see on page 3 there's no municipal approval code. The mold inspection you cited is dated before she even moved in. And on page 5 is her text with your office manager declining to fix the bathroom leak last winter. The lawyer's mouth tightened. Her hand trembled slightly as she shuffled the papers. "Your Honor, we request a continuance." "No." The judge interrupted sharply, eyes locked on the teenager. The room was so silent that the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects overhead. He picked up the documents himself, flipping through them with the practiced efficiency honed by decades on the bench. Finally, he placed them down and folded his hands. "This is thorough," he said, his tone no longer mocking, but edged with reluctant respect. He turned to the lawyer. "Based on what I see here, your case has no standing. I'm dismissing this eviction notice with prejudice." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The teenager remained still, his chest rising and falling. In silent relief, the judge looked at him long and hard. then spoke, his voice softer. "Son, where did you learn to prepare like this?" The teenager met his eyes without fear. "I paid attention. And I knew no one else would fight for her if I didn't." The judge nodded slowly. "Well, today you did more than fight. You won." Court dismissed. As the gavel came down, the plaintiff's lawyer slumped in her seat, defeated. The gallery sat stunned. No one moved. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. Because for the first time that morning, everyone understood they had never been looking at just a kid in a hoodie. They had been looking at a young man brave enough to speak truth to power, and wise enough to know his words could save someone he loved. As the judge rose from his bench, his black robe rustling softly, he paused for a moment and looked back at the teenager. The boy gathered his papers quickly, slipping them into his backpack with careful precision, his fingers trembling just slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "Wait," the judge called out, his voice echoing in the tall, wood-paneled chamber. The teenager froze mid-motion and looked up. The entire courtroom watched in silence. The gallery, moments ago buzzing with whispers and ridicule, now seemed to hold its collective breath. "Come up here," the judge said. Slowly, the teenager approached the towering mahogany bench. Up close, the judge's lined face looked tired but not unkind. His stern eyes searched the boy's features, as if trying to read a lifetime of struggle etched onto the calm exterior. "What's your name?" the judge asked quietly. "Marcus. Marcus King." The judge nodded slowly. "Marcus King. You know, I've been on this bench for 37 years, seen thousands of attorneys come and go. But today, you showed more preparation, care, and composure than many who've stood before me." Marcus said nothing, only held the judge's gaze with quiet dignity. "Are you thinking about law school?" the judge asked, his voice softer, now almost fatherly. Marcus swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I don't know how I'll afford it yet, but I'm thinking about it every day." The judge leaned back, exhaling a long breath. Then he glanced at his clerk and said, "Write down my chamber's number. Mr. King, if you ever decide to apply, you call my office. I'll write you a recommendation." "Myself." Marcus blinked, his lips parting slightly in shock. He had walked into this courtroom expecting ridicule, hostility, dismissal, everything he'd experienced since his parents died and his cousin took him in. He never expected hope. "Thank you, Your Honor," he whispered, his voice cracking despite his best effort. The judge nodded firmly. "Don't thank me. You earned this moment. Now, go home and tell your cousin she can sleep easy tonight." Marcus turned around. As he walked back down the aisle, the gallery parted for him. The same people who had laughed at his clothes now stepped aside in silent respect. Some looked down, ashamed. Others watched him with new eyes, seeing not just a boy in a hoodie, but a protector, a fighter, a young man with a future. Outside the courtroom, the bright summer sun blinded him for a second. He stepped onto the wide courthouse steps and felt a gust of warm wind brush his face. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders loosened. He pulled out his phone and called his cousin. "It's over," he said softly when she answered. "We're not losing the house. We're going home tonight." She broke down crying on the other end. He smiled faintly, feeling tears threaten his own eyes, but he blinked them back and whispered, "Don't cry. We're okay. I promised you, right?" And as he stood there, phone pressed to his ear, backpack slung over one shoulder, staring. Out at the busy streets beyond the courthouse, Marcus felt something shift deep in his chest, a realization that sometimes the world tries to tell you who you are by what you wear, where you live, or how old you are. But none of that matters when you stand up and speak with the quiet power of truth, because when you do, even the highest judge in the room has to listen. That evening, Marcus sat on the worn sofa in their small living room, the same couch he had slept on for years. His cousin, Tanisha, was pacing back and forth, tears still drying on her cheeks. She paused every few steps just to look at him, as if trying to make sense of what had happened. "How did you do it?" she asked finally, her voice cracking under the weight of exhaustion and relief. "How did you stand there so calm when everyone was against you?" Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at his scuffed sneakers. The same sneakers the court had laughed at that morning. He rubbed his palms together before answering softly. "Because I had to," he said. "I kept thinking, if I don't speak up, you'll lose this place." I didn't care if they laughed. I just needed them to listen long enough to hear the truth. Tanisha knelt in front of him and held his face in her trembling hands. "Your mama and daddy would be so proud of you," she whispered, her tears falling onto his cheeks. Marcus swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten painfully. "I hope so." That night, after Tanisha fell asleep in her room for the first time in weeks without fear of eviction, Marcus sat at the old kitchen table under the flickering fluorescent light. He pulled out his homework and legal notes, spreading them out in careful stacks. On top, he placed the judge's chamber's number, written neatly on a yellow sticky note. He stared at it for a long time. The promise of a future he had only dared to imagine now felt closer, almost real. He closed his eyes and pictured himself standing in a courtroom, not as a scared teenager in a hoodie, but as an attorney in a well-cut suit, defending those who had no voice, just like today. In his mind, he saw himself walking to the defense table, briefcase in hand, people rising to greet him with respect, not because of his clothes or his title, but because they knew he was the kind of lawyer who never gave up on his clients. Because he was one of them. Because he knew what it felt like to be dismissed, ignored, and underestimated. He opened his eyes slowly, the vision burning bright in his chest like a silent vow, a promise to the boy he was today and the man he was becoming. Outside, the city slept under the glow of streetlights. The hum of passing cars was the only sound, carrying with it the quiet truth of a new chapter beginning. For Marcus, this was more than winning a case. It was proof that his voice mattered. That preparation and courage could open doors no one thought belonged to him. And as the clock ticked past midnight, Marcus King continued studying at that small kitchen table. Hoodie sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes scanning every line of legal text with hungry focus. Because tomorrow, and every day after, he would rise again. And one day soon, he would walk back into that same courtroom. Not as a kid in a hoodie fighting for a home, but as an attorney fighting for every person the system tried to ignore. Days turned into weeks, and news of the teenager who defended his cousin began to spread. It started with a quiet murmur among clerks at the courthouse, then moved to local legal aid offices, and finally reached the ears of community organizations, who saw in Marcus a symbol of quiet resistance and unbreakable hope. One afternoon, as Marcus walked down his high school hallway, backpack slung over one shoulder, classmates parted to let him pass. He wasn't the star athlete or the class president. He didn't wear designer clothes or flash expensive phones. But now, people saw him differently. "Yo, Marcus," someone called out. He turned to see Devin, a sophomore who usually skipped class. "My brother's getting evicted too. Could you?" "I don't know. Show me how to help him." Marcus smiled softly and nodded. "Yeah. Meet me at lunch. I'll teach you how to file an affidavit." That day, in the far corner of the cafeteria, a group of kids crowded around him. He taught them how to organize documents, how to read court notices line by line, how to ask questions calmly even when adults dismissed them. Each time he explained, his confidence grew. He realized this knowledge wasn't just saving his own family. It was giving power to others who felt powerless for too long. One evening, after everyone else was asleep, Marcus sat alone in his room, lit only by the soft glow of his phone screen. He opened a blank note and wrote down a promise to himself. "One day, I'll build a place where kids like me can prepare without fear. A place where nobody gets laughed out of court because of what they wear. A place where we teach each other to speak up and to win." He paused, reading it over and over, letting the words etch themselves deep into his resolve. Then he added, "Until then, I'll keep showing up. For me, for my cousin. For everyone they think doesn't matter." He locked his phone and set it beside his pillow. For the first time in years, sleep came quickly, and his dreams were calm. A year later, Marcus sat in the back row of a small community legal workshop. His hoodie was replaced by a neatly pressed collared shirt, but he still wore his old sneakers. To him, they were a reminder of who he was and why he started. In front of him stood a young woman from the Housing Justice Clinic, explaining tenant rights to a group of families facing eviction notices. Marcus listened intently, jotting down notes even on things he already knew. Because for him, learning never stopped. Knowledge wasn't just power. It was survival. It was dignity. It was the difference between losing your home or keeping it, between silence and being heard. When the workshop ended, the organizer approached him. "Marcus King?" she asked, glancing at her clipboard. "Yes, ma'am. We're opening up paid internship slots for summer court advocates. I heard your story last year, the judge you appeared before. He called our director personally. Said you had a gift." Marcus felt his chest tighten with quiet pride. "I'd be honored," he replied softly. She handed him a folder. "Orientation starts next week. Welcome to the team, Marcus." He took the folder and held it tightly as he walked out into the crisp evening air. The city lights flickered against the darkening sky, illuminating streets filled with cars, buses, and weary pedestrians. But to Marcus, the world looked clearer than ever. He thought of his cousin at home, making dinner after a long shift. He thought of Devin and the other kids in his school, fighting silent battles no one saw. He thought of that courtroom, the gavel slamming down, the judge's eyes softening, the laughter fading to silence, and he knew this was only the beginning. One day, he promised himself he would open a legal aid center dedicated to teenagers and young adults. A place where kids like him could walk in wearing hoodies and sneakers and be greeted not with smirks, but with open folders, pens, and paper. A place where dignity wasn't earned through suits or status, but given freely through education and preparation. He smiled faintly to himself and whispered under his breath, "They're going to see us. All of us." He crossed the street as the pedestrian signal turned green, cars pausing in their rush to let him pass. Each step felt lighter, firmer, more certain. Because he wasn't just walking home. He was walking toward a future he was building with every word he spoke, every document he filed, every person he helped prepare to fight back. And in that quiet city evening, with traffic lights blinking red and gold above him, Marcus King, once dismissed as just a kid in a hoodie, walked on, carrying with him the unbreakable truth that brilliance has no dress code, courage needs no permission, and justice belongs to those who stand ready to speak it. Years passed, and the city skyline slowly transformed with new buildings, glass towers and bustling transit lines weaving through neighborhoods once ignored. In a modest brick building on the east side, a new sign hung above, freshly painted. Doors. King Legal Prep and Advocacy CNT are inside. Rows of simple desks lined the main hall. On each desk sat stacks of printed court forms, highlighters, and yellow legal pads. The walls were decorated with framed quotes, "Courage is silent. Until spoken, dignity is preparation. Justice has no dress code." In one of the private rooms, Marcus sat across from a teenage girl wearing a faded denim jacket and clutching a worn spiral notebook to her chest. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "They're trying to evict us," she whispered. "My mom works nights and she doesn't know what to say in court." Marcus nodded, his gaze steady and reassuring. "We'll get you ready," he said softly, handing her a pen and a blank affidavit form. "Start by writing down everything you remember about your rent payments and repairs. We'll organize it together." She blinked at him, surprised. You're the Marcus King, aren't you? The one who defended his cousin when he was my age?" Marcus smiled faintly, lines creasing at the corners of his eyes now. "That's me," he said. "And soon you'll be ready to stand strong, just like I did." In the next room, his team of young attorneys and legal aides worked quietly, reviewing cases for the upcoming week. Each one of them had once been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. And each one carried that silent fire to make sure no child ever walked into court alone again as evening fell. Marcus stood by his office window, overlooking the neighborhood street below. Kids rode rusted bikes home from school. Mothers and fathers carried grocery bags up cracked sidewalks. Neon lights flickered to life in nearby storefronts. He thought back to that day in court, when his sneakers squeaked against the polished wood floors, and the gallery laughed. When a judge smirked at his hoodie. When lawyers dismissed him as just another teenager out of his depth. And he remembered the moment it all changed. The hush that fell when truth was spoken calmly, powerfully, and backed by preparation. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of all the stories that had walked through his doors since then, each life changed. Each dignity restored, each eviction notice dismissed by courage. "We're not done yet," he whispered to himself. "Not until every kid knows they deserve to be heard." He turned back to his desk, picked up the next file, and began to read. Because justice was not an abstract ideal to him. It was paperwork, organized on a desk at midnight. It was a trembling teenage voice learning to say, "Objection, Your Honor." It was a place where no one was mocked for wearing a who. It was the quiet brilliance of preparation turning into power. It was the courage to stand up and say, "This is wrong, and here's why." And in that small legal prep center, as darkness settled over the city and the streetlights flickered outside, Marcus King worked on the boy who once walked into court to defend his cousin, now a man building a legacy that would outlive them. It was late on a rainy Saturday afternoon when Marcus sat alone in his office, reviewing intake forms scattered across his desk. The rhythmic patter of rain against the window soothed his tired mind. Outside, the streets glistened with neon reflections, and cars rolled by with headlights. Casting fleeting shadows on his walls, his eyes paused on an old photograph pinned above his desk. In it, a 17-year-old boy wearing a hoodie stood in court, papers clutched in his hands, his face calm but fierce. Next to him was his cousin, smiling with tears in her eyes. That day felt both distant and forever etched into his bones. A soft knock sounded at his door. He looked up to see a young man, no more than 19, standing nervously with damp hair and an anxious expression. "Mr. King?" the boy asked, his voice trembling. "I don't have an appointment, but I didn't know where else to go." Marcus gestured him in gently. "Come sit down. What's your name? Jameer?" "All right, Jameer," Marcus said, leaning forward with the same unwavering calm he carried into every courtroom. "Tell me what's happening." The boy sat down, his shoulders hunched under a soaked denim jacket. Tears welled in his eyes as he explained how his mother had been hospitalized after collapsing at work, and their landlord filed for eviction. 2 days later, ignoring every payment receipt they showed him, Marcus listened quietly, nodding, jotting down notes. When Jameer finished, Marcus handed him a tissue and spoke softly. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, tapping his legal pad. Jameer shook his head, wiping his eyes. "This is how we win," Marcus said, his voice deep and steady. "This is how we keep your home." He began explaining the process step by step, just as he had done with his cousin all those years ago, just as he had taught dozens of teenagers since. As he spoke, Jameer's trembling eased. His shoulders straightened. His breathing steadied. By the time they finished, there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Come back tomorrow," Marcus said. "We'll file your first motion, and I'll go with you to court." Jameer blinked, stunned. "You do that for me?" Marcus smiled, faintly. "Someone did it for me once. It changed everything." After Jameer left, Marcus sat alone again, the sound of rain softening into a quiet lullaby against the windows. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He thought about the system that had once dismissed him, the judge who had doubted him, the courtroom that had mocked him, and he thought about every young person who now walked through his doors. Wearing hoodies, torn jeans, or tired eyes, carrying their stories like unspoken prayers. He saw them all. He heard them all. And he would never stop fighting until every single one knew, your voice matters. Your truth matters, and your brilliance needs no permission to shine. He opened his eyes and looked out at the rain-washed streets of the city he loved. In that quiet moment, he felt something settle in his chest. Not the fire of anger or the weight of grief, but a calm, powerful certainty. The certainty that real change wasn't just about winning cases. It was about building. Generations of fighters, thinkers, and leaders who would rise up together. Who would turn mockery into dignity, fear into preparation, and silence into voices that shook courtrooms to their foundations. Marcus King stood up, turned off his office lamp, and walked into the night rain with only his thin coat to shield him, but he felt no chill, because he carried within him a warmth no storm could touch, the warmth of a boy who once spoke up for his cousin, now transformed into a man who spent his life making sure no one ever faced that fight alone again. Decades later, in a sunlit auditorium filled with students, parents, and community leaders. An elderly man stood at the podium, his hair silver and his suit tailored but simple. The plaque behind him read, "Marcus King Center for Youth." Just as the audience fell silent as he adjusted the microphone, he paused for a moment, scanning the faces before him, bright-eyed teenagers in hoodies and jeans, young adults in pressed shirts, single mothers with toddlers on their laps, teachers, social workers, and local judges. He cleared his throat. Softly, "I was 17 the first time I walked into a courtroom," he began, his deep voice carrying a calm gravity. "I wore a hoodie and sneakers." The judge laughed. The lawyers dismissed me. The gallery mocked me. But I wasn't there for them. I was there for my cousin. And when I spoke, everything changed. The crowd sat mesmerized. A few older attendees wiped tears from their eyes, remembering the viral video that first told his story decades before. Marcus continued, his voice unwavering. "People think courage is loud. They think power comes from anger or force. But what I've learned is this: true power is quiet. It's preparation, it's dignity. It's the willingness to stand up when every voice tells you to sit down." I scanned the front row, where young law students sat clutching their notebooks. One girl raised her hand timidly. "Mr. King, what do we do when the system keeps telling us we don't belong?" Marcus smiled softly, eyes crinkling at the corners. "You keep showing up. You keep preparing. You keep learning. And when they dismiss your voice, you speak anyway, because one day they will listen. And when they do, you won't just change your life. You'll change the lives of everyone who comes after you." He closed his notes and stepped away. From the podium, the audience rose in a standing ovation, their applause thundering through the hall. As he walked down the steps, dozens reached out to shake his hand. Outside the center's glass doors, the city skyline glowed under the golden light of sunset. Young people lined up at the reception desk, ready to sign up for advocacy workshops, mock trials, and legal preparation programs. Each wore their own version of his past hoodies, jeans, faded jackets, determined eyes. Marcus paused before exiting, looking back at the banners hanging on the walls. Justice has no dress code. Your voice matters. Courage is preparation. He felt tears prick his eyes, but blinked them away, smiling faintly as he stepped into the evening air. The breeze carried the distant sounds of traffic, laughter, and city life humming with possibility. As he walked toward his car, his granddaughter ran up beside him, her tiny hand gripping his. She wore a pink hoodie with cartoon rockets and her hair tied into 2 puffs. "Grandpa," she said, looking up at him with wide eyes, "are you really a hero like Mama says?" He chuckled softly, bending down to kiss her forehead. "Oh, baby, I'm just someone who spoke up when it mattered." She grinned and tightened her grip on his hand. "When I grow up, I'm going to be like you." Marcus stood, looking out over the city that had once tried to silence him and now carried his name. On its walls, his heart filled with a calm, fierce pride. "No," he whispered with a smile. "You're going to be even better." And together, hand in hand, they walked into the falling dusk, leaving behind a legacy built not from wealth or status, but from quiet courage, brilliant preparation, and a single unbreakable truth that every voice matters, no matter its age, its clothing, or its volume, and when spoken with purpose, it can change the world forever. As Marcus and his granddaughter walked down the center steps into the evening, Students poured out behind them, still buzzing from his words. A teenage boy in a navy hoodie jogged to catch up with him. "Mr. King," he called out, slightly out of breath. I wanted to say thank you. I was going to drop out, I thought. Court and law weren't for kids like me, a Taff. Today, I'm staying." Marcus smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Good," he said softly. "Because kids like you are exactly who the law needs." The boy nodded, eyes shining with tears he tried to hide. He turned and ran back inside to join his friends, his hoodie bouncing with each hopeful step. Marcus continued toward his car, the city lights flickering on one by one as dusk deepened. His granddaughter swung his hand gently, her voice small, but certain. "Grandpa, can you tell me the story again? The one where you saved Auntie's house when you were just 17? Marcus chuckled, the sound deep and comforting in the quiet street. "Of course, baby girl. I'll tell it to you as many times as you want, okay?" She squeaked happily. "Because when I'm big, I want to help people like you." Squeezed her hand tighter, feeling his heart swell with an emotion too big for words. Pride, gratitude, and an unbreakable love for the generations that would come after him. "You will, baby," he whispered. "You will." They reached his car, and as he helped her into her seat, he looked up one last time at the glowing sign above the center's entrance. His name was there in bold letters, but it wasn't about him. It was about every voice that would walk through those doors. Every young person who would leave carrying dignity and knowledge the world never wanted them to have, and with that final silent vow. Marcus King closed the car door, started the engine, and drove off into the deepening night, leaving behind a city forever changed by a boy in a hoodie who once refused to stay silent. This is not just a courtroom drama about a teenager winning a legal battle. It's a powerful lesson about assumptions, quiet courage, and generational impact. Don't judge by appearance. The teenager walked into court wearing a hoodie and sneakers. Everyone, the judge, lawyers, and audience, immediately dismissed him based on how he looked and his age. But he proved that brilliance, preparation, and dignity have no dress code. Quiet preparation is true power. He didn't shout, argue, or act arrogantly. Instead, he prepared deeply, stayed calm, and spoke his truth clearly. This shows that real power is not loud or aggressive. It is quiet, strategic, and rooted in knowledge. Standing up for others matters. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for his cousin, who had cared for him like a mother. This teaches us that using your skills and knowledge to protect others is one of the highest forms of courage and love. One voice can create generational change because he spoke up. He saved his cousin's home, inspired classmates, and later built a legal prep center to help thousands more. The story ends with his granddaughter wanting to be like him, showing that one act of courage can impact generations to come. Legacy is built through service. Marcus's true legacy was not his name on a building, but the many young people he empowered to believe in themselves. His story teaches us that the best way to leave a legacy is to lift others up.